A season beyond expectations, but a downer on championship night for USC in a second half collapse. We will review it all here on USC Trojans Live, a special edition here on championship weekend with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Matt, we appreciate you being here. How you doing?
Not being able to cover the college football playoff at a website, like, you obviously dream of that as a website editor. You want the traffic, you want the publicity, you want the buzz that goes with the playoff. Didn't happen, but, immediately pull back. Look at the 40,000-foot view. And we said this throughout the offseason at the Voice of College Football on all those summer and offseason shows that it was asking too much of this team in year one under Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch to make the playoff. Getting to a New Year's Six bowl, which this team is still likely to do. As long as Georgia beats LSU, USC is going to the Cotton Bowl, a New Year's Six game. And 11 wins, made the Pac-12 championship game, which was higher than all the preseason expectations. Utah and Oregon were the consensus 1-2 in the Pac-12. USC was the only team to go 8-1 in the 9-game Pac-12 conference schedule. So, and I said this on Monday that, hey, USC could lose to Utah here. This is still a season of overachievement. USC has still clearly overachieved this year, and that remains in place. So, obviously, very disappointing. It's a stinging loss, especially when you lead 17-3, especially when you get a turnover. You start at the Utah 39-yard line. You have a chance to go up 24-3. You have a chance to really put the boot on the throat, and you fail to do it. And then Caleb Williams gets hurt, and then Utah just physically dominates the rest of the game. So Utah left no doubt that it was the better team. Definitely a very stinging defeat. There's no doubt about it. And there's no point in denying any of that. But the big picture, this was a flawed roster. This was not a complete team. It doesn't have the SEC level quality depth that you see at the elite programs that you see with Kirby Smart at Georgia, that you have seen over the past several years with Nick Saban at Alabama and Dabo Swinney at Clemson. Like we could all see, this is not, a totally airtight team. And so, those limitations were exposed. And, last night I jumped on the Pac-12, the USC postgame show with Tony Altomore and Tim Prangley and Rick Anaya, doing a great job as they've done throughout the season. And, one of the great guests and participants in the panel conversations on these USC and Pac-12 shows all year at the Voice of College Football is Utah fan and analyst Larry Pilgrim. Larry always has something really insightful to say about Utah and the Pac-12. And the really salient point he made on last night's USC postgame show was that Utah and Kyle Whittingham, they've cultivated depth and quality depth within the program. Utah was missing Brant Queefy. Let's remember that. A tight end who's even better than Dalton Kincaid. And Dalton Kincaid's great. Queefy was better than Kincaid. Didn't have him. Didn't have Van Fillinger. Didn't have Jonah Ellis, another really important edge rusher. And their next guys on the depth chart stepped up. All right. But USC missed Andrew Voorhees, its best offensive lineman, last night. And, it was all season, Lincoln Riley is very very close to the vest about the injury situations of players. There was not a lot of talk during the week about whether Andrew Voorhees would play. Now, obviously, there was a little bit of a mystery because he left the second half of the Notre Dame game. But you weren't hearing on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, oh, he's not going to play. We learned that just shortly before kickoff. And when you're missing your best offensive lineman against Arizona, Cal, Colorado, no, that's not going to matter. That's not going to show up. USC has the resources to beat those lower end teams. But against Utah and its toughness and its culture, and against the quality depth that Kyle Whittingham and his staff have incorporated into the program, yeah, it did matter. It did show up. And then you have the Caleb Williams injury on top of it. One USC analyst during the game, Michael Castillo, does a great job with the Reign of Troy site, which is connected to Fansided. He made the point that, all right, you could deal with Voorhees being out individually. You could deal with Caleb Williams' mobility being limited in isolation because he can still throw to his wide receivers, and maybe you have Voorhees in there to run block for Austin Jones and still make the offense function. You could still have the run game being bottled up if Caleb Williams is fully mobile and doing his thing with Voorhees also there. But this was all three of those problems coming together at once. You had Voorhees out, and you had Caleb being limited in mobility, and you had the running game not functioning. So USC was not equipped to deal with all three of those systemic weaknesses at once. You could deal with one, you couldn't deal with all three crashing down at the same time. So attrition and that depth problem that we discussed all throughout the offseason, if the starting offensive line is healthy, offense is going to rock and roll. We saw, even with Voorhees out, we saw USC's offense score those 17 quick points. But over the course of 60 minutes, Utah was able to reel in USC's offense because the Voorhees injury really mattered. And then you have Caleb Williams' mobility being limited, which took away so much of what makes him special. We saw that against Notre Dame, that, for 99% of quarterbacks, Notre Dame gets sacks on those plays. But Caleb Williams, fully healthy, fully mobile, he's able to turn those sacks into positive plays for USC. So that attrition along the offensive line, which we talked about for so long, didn't matter against the Arizonas and Cals of the world, but it was going to be exposed by a really tough quality opponent. Utah is that quality opponent, and that's why Utah's Pac-12 champion back-to-back years. That's why Utah is the 2022 Pac-12 champion, as you, Mark Rogers, predicted before the season. So, reality just has a way of working things out and revealing things as they are and as we predicted them to be. And, I did say that I undersold USC because I thought this team would win 10 games and USC won 11. So I was bullish on USC and yet I still underrated them. But my preseason feeling that the playoff was just a bridge too far. The playoff was probably still a level that USC wasn't likely to attain. In the end, that prediction ended up being right. And I wish I wasn't. But that is the reality. So attrition along the offensive line finally caught up to USC. And so, it really just reaffirms what we all knew going into the season, that in year one, this team was capable of competing for the Pac-12 championship because Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams coming into the Pac-12, you take this very weak conference and you inject this superstar presence into the mix, you can rise to the top in 1 year. But being at that playoff level, being at that very elite level where the Alabamas and Clemsons and Georgias and Michigans reside, that is what was going to be a 2-year process, not just one. And so it certainly puts a lot of emphasis on the transfer portal and the recruiting trail in this month of December here at USC.
So before we continue with the conversation, everyone, I want to highlight a few content points. One would be to get to Trojans Wire to follow Matt's work there. Again, it's Trojans Wire, and you see Matt's Twitter handle, which is extremely easy to find. It's just Matt Zemek. There it is, right there on the banner. Also here at the Voice of College Football, as Matt alluded to, he joined the conversation with Tim, Tony, and Rick and others last night on the Voice of College Football. So you can catch up with that. If you did not catch the post-game show, it's always an enlightening conversation, a fun conversation with those guys, as I checked out most of it last night myself. And we'll be here at the Voice of College Football throughout the day on Championship Saturday on the main channel to cover the occurrences as they start with, of course, TCU and Kansas State, the big game from the Big 12. Right, Matt. I'll take this to an individual place with the biggest ramification aside from team accomplishments, college football playoff berth being Caleb Williams and his Heisman candidacy. For me, Caleb Williams came into this game as the clear Heisman favorite, and nothing transpired in this game that would knock me from that position. And I would say he only enhanced his Heisman position, as far as I'm concerned, through the close to the first half of the game. And then what was compromised after that was that he navigated it reasonably well, considering how much of his game was taken away after that.
Totally agree. And so I've heard, late during the second half, when it became apparent that USC was going to lose or was likely to lose, and then after the game, I've heard a lot of talk about, if Max Duggan of TCU beats Kansas State, like he's in the front runner for the Heisman. Come on, where is that coming from? No one was talking about Max Duggan the previous few weeks. And so that Max Duggan mini surge of conversation from some quarters, I'm not going to say it's a majority view, but it was a significant minority view popping up on college football Twitter. The Heisman Trophy, I get it. I understand it. It's the award for the quarterback on the best quarterback on a college football playoff team. That is what the award has become. And that's why Bryce Young won the award last season. I realize that a lot of recent Heisman votes have projected that reality. We can't turn the Heisman, or at least we shouldn't turn the Heisman into the award for the best QB or the best skill position player on a team that's in the playoff. That is not what the award is supposed to be about. It's for the best player in college football. You might be the best player in college football. Your team isn't good enough to get you to the playoff, all right? So just because TCU might go to the playoff 13-0, that doesn't mean, Max Duggan is the front runner. That is not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Max Duggan struggled against a Texas defense, which has been lit up by Oklahoma State and a lot of other, average to, ordinary offenses over the course of this season. He made the clutch late drive against Baylor, but as a whole, that 60-minute game, nothing special. I mean, not being able to score 30 on a Baylor defense, which has allowed point totals in the 40s to West Virginia and others this season. I mean, Max Duggan, I think definitely worthy of a Heisman finalist invite, but Hendon Hooker's been better. Caleb Williams has been better. Michael Penix at Washington has been better. So let's cool it with the Max Duggan talk. And just the fact that Max Duggan, and again, no disrespect to him, if he's a Heisman finalist, he deserves it. But the idea that he is better than Caleb Williams just because Caleb Williams lost a game in which he got hurt and in which he didn't have his best offensive lineman, can we have some perspective and context here, please? And can we realize that Caleb Williams was absolutely brilliant in this game before he got hurt? All right. So if you think that this game reduced or eroded Caleb Williams' profile, his candidacy, his credentials, please turn in your football analyst card right now. All right. There's still the USA Netherlands is still going on. You can watch that game. You can watch college basketball all day. There are tons of college basketball games. And let's just leave the room whenever college football is discussed, please. Thank you. All right. If you think this game hurt Caleb Williams' Heisman chances, go home. All right. Pack it in. You do not deserve to be taken seriously in any college football conversation ever again. Period.
Wow. Matt coming strong here. And I do agree that Max Duggan's had a remarkable season. It's a remarkable story of what he's battled through, but that doesn't define best player in the country, best story, most adversity fought through, any of that. It's not best player. The best player is Caleb Williams.
And this is the thing about Heisman debates, is that when I say that, he doesn't deserve to win the Heisman, that's not a criticism, okay? We're just comparing that player to other players, all right? So Max Duggan might be the fourth best player in all of college football for 2022, which is great. That's outstanding. It's brilliant. But you cannot say that Max Duggan has been better than Hendon Hooker, and especially Caleb Williams. You cannot make that statement. All right. So it's not a criticism of Duggan. It's just that Hooker and especially Caleb have been much better in 2022. That's what Heisman conversations are about. People think that it's criticism of the fourth best player in the whole United States. No, it's saying that there's another player and another player who have been better in the United States for a given season. And that's what people often miss about Heisman conversations. They think it's criticism of the player. No, it's just comparing that player to another player or two players who have been empirically better.
I even think that Caleb Williams would be considered or would be the front runner for an MVP. So it's not an MVP even, it's a best player award. Those aren't necessarily the same, but I would even argue that Caleb Williams would be the MVP in America, although I think that there are some more valid arguments against that. But it is the best player in America, and we know that the best player in America, technically, if we brought in NFL scouts and we surveyed every position, could be an edge rusher, it could be a left tackle. We understand it's a position, it's a skill position award that's leaned heavily toward the quarterback position. That's just what it is.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, we appreciate you being here for a special edition of USC Live with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Get on over to Trojans Wire, check out Matt's work. And again, a tremendous post-game show here at the Voice of College Football with Matt taking part with Rick and Tony and Tim and others last night. This game, boy, just turned on a dime. So you had the USC dominance for the first 4 or 5 drives of the game, offensively and defensively, and Utah teetering on being run out of the stadium. They held on a 1st and goal, forced a field goal. I had the sense at that point, for as much as Matt would like to pat me on the back for predicting Utah to win the Pac-12 championship, which I did at the beginning of the season, that I certainly had no confidence in Utah at that point. I felt like, okay, they're just holding the dam at that point. They got a field goal, and that's a stop when you're facing Caleb Williams. But I just thought, okay, man, this is just, how in the world are they going to cover these receivers and contain Caleb Williams? Well, at the point of the injury, or at the point at which it became apparent that Caleb Williams was compromised, I'm sure you have an encyclopedic remembrance of that versus the score and the time in the game that I don't recollect, even though I watched every play of the game. So can you draw a line as to when it became noticeable that something's wrong and it's affecting his game? And I don't want to take anything away from Utah, and we can touch on that a little bit later, versus, when the score flipped and when Utah took over.
Well, one of the key details of this game, and it was just like the October 15th game in Salt Lake City, is that Utah got. Oh my God. Hey, come on.
That's all right.
Come on. Hey, come on. Just like the October 15 game in Salt Lake City, Utah got the ball to start the second half. And so Utah was able to bridge possessions. USC led by 14 points in that first game on October 15th. And yep. Utah was able to bridge possessions at the end of the first half. Hey, come on. Please. Utah was able to bridge possessions at the end of the first half and the start of the second half.
So in regards to that situation, so Matt outlined earlier a number of the Utah injuries on that side of the football versus USC. And the reason I'm bringing that up is there was a lot of conversation following the Caleb Williams injury that USC would have won this game if Caleb Williams was healthy. maybe he would, maybe he would not have. That's possible. Basically, what I'm outlining here, Matt, is the reason I brought that up in regards to the Caleb Williams injury is, of course, a number of USC fans, and I don't think this is an unreasonable point. You just can't draw a line between Caleb Williams got injured, therefore USC lost. But I think it's a completely valid point. He was obviously compromised considerably to say we don't know what would have happened had he been healthy, even though it turned out to be a blowout. Football games, and so Utah obviously came into the game with less publicized injuries than what Caleb Williams became, that unless they're really reviewed like you reviewed them, edge rusher, Tavion Thomas, all sorts of different players for Utah that we just trying to measure out, injuries are part of the game versus trying to, it's, I don't consider it, nor should it be an excuse for a loss, but it's a talking point that's reasonable. It was all out there for us to see in regards to the injuries coming into the game and how the injuries during the game, Caleb Williams in particular, played into the outcome.
Yeah. So now that I finally got the dogs outside of the house, so Utah was able to bridge possessions at the end of the first half, start of the second half in this game, that middle eight, which has become the fashionable term these days in college football for stacking together possessions without the opposing offense being able to take the field. That was the bridge that enabled Utah to turn that 14-point deficit into a tie game at halftime and then take the lead early in the third quarter. And so, because Caleb Williams was diminished in his effectiveness, not being able to capitalize late in the second quarter, not being able to get points, at that particular juncture of the game, like that was the crucial missed opportunity, much as it was on October 15th when USC was up 21-7 and couldn't build on the lead. USC had the ball up 21-7 in that first game from October, couldn't get a 24-7 or 28-7 lead. USC never got a 3-score lead, and not being able to go up at least 17 points in this game, that represented scoreboard pressure USC couldn't apply to Utah. And so, that was the first part of it. And then, like, after halftime, we all wondered, like, would Caleb after halftime be refreshed? Would he be renewed or not? And that's really when you saw a lot of USC reporters and beat writers saying, you know what, he's not physically up to par. Because I think there was a sense of maybe halftime could be a point where he could regroup and recharge, and it just didn't happen. So that was part of Caleb Williams' night for USC.
So I'd like to hit on two other topics for sure. One would be the Alex Grinch defense.
And I'm listening. Just a sec. Just keep talking.
Sure. And certainly how much of this was an Alex Grinch defensive scheme, shortcomings there, especially in a second matchup. That brings a whole different dynamic to it. The chess match is heightened when it becomes a second matchup versus the same team, and knowing that personnel and their scheme so well, and how much do you stay with what you did the first game versus how much do you change. And so basically the Alex Grinch narrative of he did a lousy job or just his players did not execute. And of course, the missed tackles were evident for all to see.
Yeah, so the Alex Grinch conversation, hey, get to Trojans Wire. You're getting full Alex Grinch analysis and reaction, because this is the most important conversation to have surrounding USC football right now. And if you missed the story earlier in the week, I made the point that with Jim Leonard being jilted, being left at the altar by Wisconsin, he's a free agent now, and the industry speculation is that he will take the Green Bay Packer defensive coordinator job once Matt LaFleur fires Joe Barry, his failing defensive coordinator in the midst of a horrible Packers season, which is not going to make the playoffs. That, Mike Bone, if he has a chance to make one of those stealth ninja moves, just as he made the stealth ninja move to get Lincoln Riley, something no one saw coming in this industry last year. If Mike Bone and Lincoln Riley can make a move on Jim Leonard and convince him, hey, you need to be at USC. This is where you can win a national championship. You can raise your stock, and you can then become a head coach at a Power 5 program. Obviously Wisconsin, Chris McIntosh, the athletic director there, felt that Leonard failed his audition, right? Graham Mertz, he was the coach killer for Paul Chryst and Jim Leonard. He took down 2 coaches in one season. All right. So if you're Mike Bohn and Lincoln Riley, hey, is there an opening before the Green Bay Packers make a move at defensive coordinator? Can you sway Jim Leonard and say, hey, this is where you need to be. This is how you can send your coaching stock soaring. If they can make a move like that, or for another elite proven defensive coordinator, USC should do it. All right. Because you should have the best. Like, you shouldn't settle, for second best. You shouldn't settle for ordinary. But when I say that USC should make a move if it's there, that's not the same thing as saying USC should fire Alex Grinch, because we all knew that Alex Grinch did not have a fully stocked cupboard this season. He was not going to have all the dudes, all the depth that he really needed to be great as a defensive coordinator. And this is really just a continuation of the Alex Grinch, Lincoln Riley story that we've seen over the past 4 seasons, 3 at Oklahoma, now 1 at USC. With the exception of 2020, in 3 of these past 4 seasons, the Alex Grinch defense under Lincoln Riley has been entirely unremarkable. But when you consider that Alex Grinch was hired to clean up the mess left by Mike Stoops at Oklahoma in 2018, so Oklahoma's 2019 and 2021 defenses, they weren't very good, but they were better than Mike Stoops in 2018. So we have a situation where Alex Grinch is basically the garbage man. He's asked to clean up a really bad mess. He's asked to take a really bad situation and make it better. And he has, but it's not that much better. So you get still what is a mediocre, below average product. But, what did we say throughout the offseason here at USC? It was Alex Grinch's job is to make USC's defense not terrible. And it was terrible last night. And it's been terrible for the second half of the season, starting with the Utah game on October 15th. USC's defense was terrible in the 2 games it played against Utah. So that's not the opponent you want to have a terrible game against. And Grinch flunked twice against Utah. But over the course of 13 games, he was not terrible. In those first 6 games, Grinch was actually very good. I mean, through the Washington State game on October 8th, let's try to remember what that was like, all right? 2 months have passed, but, let's remember Alex Grinch was legitimately a Broyles semifinalist caliber coordinator through those first 6 games. USC's defense completely won the Oregon State game in week 4, September 24th, and USC's defense at least had a 50% share, if not a majority share, of responsibility for winning that Washington State game 30-14 on October 8th, shut out Washington State in the second half. So as a 13-game body of work, Alex Grinch did not underachieve. In fact, he slightly overachieved over the course of 13 games. This defense over 13 games was not terrible. It was terrible in the second half of the season, especially against Arizona, even more especially against Cal. Had a lot of rough moments against UCLA, a rough second half against Notre Dame, and then got blown away by Utah in the second half last night. But over 13 games, Alex Grinch and the defense did not underachieve. They met that low bar. Now, again, it's a low bar. They were better than terrible. That doesn't mean they were good, but they were better than terrible, and it was enough to get this team to 11 wins and very likely a New Year's Six Bowl. So it's a continuation of what we've seen from Alex Grinch in 2019 with Oklahoma, getting blown out in the playoff by Joe Burrow and LSU, and then in 2021, falling just short of a Big 12 title, but still winning 10 games. Then Bob Stoops takes over in the Alamo Bowl, and Oklahoma wins an 11th game with Riley and Grinch newly situated at USC. So with Alex Grinch, the bottom line is he is very clearly not a great defensive coordinator. He is also just as clearly not a bad defensive coordinator. Now, people are going to say, okay, the defense was bad the past several games. Yes, But of course, we knew that USC didn't have the top shelf talent or the top shelf depth. So Alex Grinch contained the damage enough that this team exceeded preseason expectations. This was viewed as a 9-3 team. It finished 11-2. So you can't say that Grinch did a bad job, but he also didn't do a great job. And that's been the story of his career. So in terms of focusing this conversation on Alex Grinch, I want to make this point very clear because this gets to the heart of the conversation with Alex Grinch. If you replace him with Jim Leonard, many will say, oh, Lincoln Riley stabbed Alex Grinch in the back. What a Judas. What a betrayal. No, you can't look at it that way. Lincoln Riley has been incredibly loyal to Alex Grinch. All right. I mean, he is stuck with Alex Grinch in ways that other coaches would not have. But if you have a Jim Leonard out there to nab and bring in as defensive coordinator, like that is not an insult to Alex Grinch to say, hey, we can upgrade and you need to find a defensive coordinator job or maybe a group of 5 head coaching job. Like that could be the change of scenery and the breath of fresh air. And if Grinch does want a group of 5 head coaching job, like I think he's earned it. Like let's see what he can do. So like it shouldn't be seen as a betrayal of Alex Grinch if Lincoln Riley sees an upgrade and is able to make it in concert with Mike Bone. USC should be looking for an elite coordinator. And on a broader level, it's just, do you have the best possible man for the job? This is not about college football. This is about any walk of life. This is about any profession. You should want to hire the best man for the job. And so it's not a criticism of Grinch so much as it's just he's done fine, but fine is not elite. Fine is not college football playoff. Fine is not getting blown out by Utah in a conference championship game and ending a season with a blowout loss against a really good team. Like that is part of the Alex Grinch profile. So like I am fine. I am fundamentally fine with the idea of letting Alex Grinch coach for his job and his future at USC in 2023, because like it will be the ultimate put up or shut up season. It will be the ultimate prove it moment for Alex Grinch if he does get 2023 at USC. Like it will be the no more excuses. You now have to produce. You now have to upgrade. You now have to teach tackling and teach technique and teach players to get results. Year 1 was your grace period, your learning curve. 2023, training wheels come off. You have to deliver. I'm fine with that. But I'm also perfectly fine with the idea of if Jim Leonard is willing to come to Los Angeles and you can make that very obvious upgrade, well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to upgrade any part of your football operation? Why wouldn't you want to upgrade any part of your business? That's really the collection of tension points at USC that I don't think Alex Grinch has disqualified himself from this job. I think it's perfectly reasonable to allow him to prove himself once and for all, up or down, in 2023. But if there's a better replacement available, why wouldn't any football coach, why wouldn't any business seek to improve its product?
We won't take this down the road of individual plays, but I just wanted to highlight 2 things that stood out to me, amongst other things on the defensive side. Eric Gentry on one of the plays while Utah was making its comeback, one of the key short yardage plays, or maybe this just stands out to me. Dixon and he collided in the backfield where Gentry had the opportunity to make about a 3-yard loss. And Dixon just overpowered him, just knocked him down. And I thought, okay, well, this is the dynamics of any player. There's the good and the bad. So for all of Eric Gentry's range and excellent athleticism, and we saw him clip Cam Rising in the backfield when Rising tried to roll out and take the corner. And Eric Gentry had so much range and so much vertical I'm missing the basketball term. So much range, basically.
Length,
that he was able to clip Cam Rising. Few players would have been able to, and throw him down for a 7-yard loss. But then on that particular play, he was overpowered physically. So that's the positive and negative to having that kind of unique player playing a linebacker position. In that confrontation, he was not up to the challenge. He's just not that kind of player. The other one was Dalen McCutcheon, who was to partially blame for the long Thomas Yasmin 60-yard pitch and catch on like a 3rd and 16, 3rd and 18 across the middle. He catches it, breaks all sorts of tackles. And in amongst that's Dalen McCutcheon trying to not making the sure tackle, trying to strip the ball. It appeared as though he's trying to strip the ball, trying to make the tackle, strip the ball at the same time. And I thought, well, if I just saw that play isolated, I would think, okay, this is a USC defensive back, not wanting contact, not doing the dirty work, not getting the guy to the ground. But Dalen McCutcheon also made 2 of the bigger hits and just solid form tackles, just bone-crushing tackles earlier in the game. So I thought, that's not like he's shying away from contact. That's him making a risky play, trying to strip the ball in, while a player's running full sprint instead of just, making the play, getting him to the ground, continuing to fight for the next play.
Yeah, and so, it's well documented that USC's had this amazing turnover differential, and one of the big questions was, what happens when the takeaways aren't coming? Now, USC did get 1 takeaway early in the game, and of course, crucially, did not translate that takeaway into points. Huge turning point moment in the game. But when the turnovers aren't coming, a lot of USC fans were thinking, oh, we're going to intercept Cam Rising. The interception's coming. It's about to come. And it didn't come. And so what was USC able to do? And so, Eric Gentry, just to go back to Larry Pilgrim, our Utah friend and analyst last night on the USC postgame show, he predicted that this would be a rough night for Gentry. But the nuance there is that it was a rough night for Gentry in the running game, where physically, that's his weakness. He's not especially thick and muscular, so he's not powerful within the context of going up against an offensive lineman fighting through blocks in the running game. But where Gentry really needed to be more of a factor was in the pass game, because his deflected passes early in the season, the length that you mentioned, the reach, the long arms, and also his long strides, getting into passing lanes, like that's where Gentry really needed to be more of a factor on those 3rd and longs that Utah was converting. That's really where Gentry needed to make more of an impact and didn't. So, that really shows, where he has to develop and where he has to evolve over the course of the season. But it just brings up the larger point of when turnovers weren't happening, this defense was extremely flawed. And so, some people within the USC program think that, like you could see that Alex Grinch was teaching defenders to rake the ball out when making tackles, that he was teaching turnovers. And that obviously had a lot of benefits over the course of the whole season. But when you go up against a really physical, tough team such as Utah, teaching turnovers has its limits. That you need to teach getting guys down. You need to teach making the safe, secure tackle. And Grinch didn't succeed in that area. And it gets back to the earlier point that you made, in which a lot of commentators made during and after the game, and that is that guys were in position to make plays but didn't. And so to a certain extent, that's on the players, but it is still very much on the defensive coordinator to teach his players how to tackle. And you can't really just say, oh, that's just a player's issue. And it really just reinforces the point that as much as we can point to the lack of depth and the lack of, full resources on the defensive side of the roster for USC, as a way of saying, hey, let's give Alex Grinch 2023 to sort these things out, get more depth in the portal, give him more bodies, give him more quality, which is all very reasonable. It does remain that Alex Grinch does not have a long established track record of getting defenses that are absolutely airtight in terms of tackling. And so that leaves the door open for criticism. And Lincoln Riley has to really be thinking, do I really want to ride with this guy in 2023 and in 2024 as we go into the Big Ten, where football is very physical? Obviously, a lot of Michigan fans have been, saying that, thinking that, reminding me of that over the past 12 hours. So like this is something like it shouldn't just be given to Alex Grinch. It shouldn't just be assumed that, of course, you give him 2023. I think Lincoln Riley needs to spend these next few weeks looking at the chessboard, seeing if there's an elite defensive coordinator on the market, and if you can make that pull. Now, maybe you fail to make that pull and you go with Grinch in 2023, fine. But like, you should make an effort. You should at least have your eyes open to see if there are better options.
There's a few comments being made in the chat concerning Lincoln Riley's lack of a great track record in big games. This is where I stand on this one. So I had a caller last night before the game say that, well, Lincoln Riley's used to playing in big games. He's been in playoff games. He's got a huge advantage over Kyle Whittingham. This caller wasn't educated on Kyle Whittingham's track record. I outlined that, and then he came more to the center that there's not any obvious coaching advantage here. You can pick a side, but it's not obvious in any such way. The thing that I will tell people anytime they bring up a coach in big games and then they throw records out, my point is that first and foremost, let's define what a big game is. Well, a big game is relative to the situation. It's relative to the program. You can't lose college football playoff games if you don't reach the college football playoff. If you're not winning conference championship games, which I consider to be enormous games because they usually are attached to entry into the playoff. And then also you have to win major key games within the conference schedule to get to a conference championship game. So Lincoln Riley has won tons of big games based on what I define a big game. But there were just a couple comments about this is Lincoln Riley losing another big game, and this is his resume.
Well, so he got blown out in a high stage late season game, and that's happened before. But here's the thing. This was year one, right? Like the real problem with Lincoln Riley in big games, or like if you want to say, Lincoln Riley really doesn't measure up in big games. I mean, let's keep in mind that in the 2019 Peach Bowl, he went up against Joe Burrow and LSU, arguably the greatest single season we've seen by any player in college football history, from an LSU team that sent 14 players to the 2020 NFL draft. And Oklahoma had a few players suspended for that game in the 2019 Peach Bowl. Like, you don't say, oh, well, he can't win the big game when like he was a clear, substantial underdog going up against a historically great quarterback. All right. And in 2018, like no one thought that Oklahoma was going to beat Tua Tagovailoa and that roaring 2018 Alabama offense. Lincoln Riley was an underdog there. If you want to make the argument against Lincoln Riley in big games and in terms of like his overall coaching profile, you look at two things. One, you look at the fact that, in 2017, he had his elite team at Oklahoma. Like that was his best team, his best collection of resources, and he had a 17-point lead over Georgia and blew it. All right. So like that was a case of having an opportunity right there in front of him, failing. Second point, in 2021, after a 2020 season at Oklahoma in which the OU defense really stepped up and elevated. So you had Spencer Rattler, and we've seen these past few weeks against Tennessee and Clemson just how much natural talent Spencer Rattler has. He has a high ceiling, maybe not a high floor, but certainly a high ceiling of potential. So we had Spencer Rattler. You had a proven 2020 defense carrying over with a lot of returning personnel into the 2021 season. Oklahoma was widely predicted to make the national title game before the 2021 season. It was predicted to get past that semifinal hump, that hurdle, and that Oklahoma team fell short. It fell well short of its goal. So, like, there are some specific failures for Lincoln Riley, times when his team was fully expected to reach a certain standard, or you had it right there to win and achieve when it was in a favorable position, up 17 against Georgia in 2017, fully picked, throughout the country to make the national title game in 2021, and it fell short. Those are the arguments you should be making against Lincoln Riley. The other argument you should be making against Lincoln Riley is just that we continue to see his defenses be, below average. And at some point, it's less about Alex Grinch and it's more about, does Lincoln Riley insist on having a better defense? Does Lincoln Riley really and truly care about having the best possible defense he can? Or is just he's so in love with his offense that he just wants a defensive coordinator who will be good enough, Alex Grinch, just be better than terrible, and I can do the rest with a Cadillac quarterback and my offensive system. Is that what Lincoln Riley really thinks? Because you can make that argument that's what he's fine with. That's what he's comfortable with having, because that's been his Oklahoma legacy, and it carried into year one at USC. So those are the arguments to make about Lincoln Riley, not that he lost to Utah on a night when Andrew Voorhees was out, Caleb Williams' mobility was limited, and he had an obviously flawed defense. He did not have a complete team. And that's not an excuse. It's just a reality of the limitations of this roster from Clay Helton. And I thought that Riley could overcome those limitations in terms of, again, competing for the Pac-12 title, which he did, winning 10 games, which he did, reaching a New Year's Six bowl, which he's likely to do. But I thought that all those limitations would be a problem in terms of the playoff. So it's not as though he fell well short of the mark. It's not as though he was expected to make the playoff this year. Let's just step back in this moment here. As painful as it is for USC fans to not make the playoff, let's step back and realize the expectation this year from nearly all national commentators was not the playoff. It was win the Pac-12. That was the realistic expectation. And USC came very close and did better than most people probably thought. So that is part of the Lincoln Riley conversation. He has to answer this big game question. He has to answer this big game problem. There's no question about it. But this is not the year. This is not the example you make as your cornerstone foundational argument about that point. This was, a transitional year in which long-standing issues remained in place. Next year is going to really be the telltale sign of, does he fix it? Does he improve it? Does he take the next step? This year, again, USC overachieved, and what happened last night against Utah, while obviously disappointing, obviously frustrating, it doesn't change the larger reality of what's happened over the 13 games this season.
Robert Harris, thank you so much for the Super Chat contribution. We appreciate that. And keep in mind, we did discuss this topic extensively, but to honor the Super Chat, of course, how much credit do we give the blowout to the Caleb Williams injury? Do you want to readdress that, Matt?
I mean, it was a factor, but what the thing I said earlier, I think, is the most salient point. And another analyst, Michael Castillo, really good USC analyst, pointed this out, that if you had Caleb Williams' mobility being limited just by itself, with Andrew Voorhees being healthy and in that offensive line instead of right tackle Mason Murphy, who got exposed, Mason Murphy was able to be fine against the Arizonas, Cals, and Colorados, not against Utah. Utah, you needed Andrew Voorhees on that offensive line to run block and pass protect. So Caleb Williams' mobility being limited just by itself, that didn't destroy the USC offense. It was his mobility being limited with Voorhees being out, with Mason Murphy getting torched by Utah's superior defensive front. And so the ground game couldn't function. The offense became predictable and limited. Everything crashed down for the USC offense as a result of those accumulated factors. So the Caleb Williams limited mobility by itself, it's really not the whole story. It's that reality coexisting with Voorhees being out, Mason Murphy getting torched, the offensive line's lack of depth, which we talked about all offseason, getting exposed, the running game not being able to function, the domino effect of all of that together in the same game on the same night.
Matt, of course, to address the next topic, we would need to know the extent of Caleb Williams' injury, because it could be to whatever degree. But let's say it's, it's a injury that he can play with, but he's going to be compromised. Would you sit him for the bowl game?
So if Georgia beats LSU, USC goes to the Cotton Bowl, and that is January 2nd. So the timetable is favorable for USC, because sometimes the Cotton Bowl gets slotted on December 30th in the New Year's Six rotation. So on January 2nd, like, that buys Caleb Williams a few more days. And so, so 4 weeks. 4 weeks is what we're looking at. And so if it's like just a pulled hamstring as opposed to torn hamstring, forget it. Like, you have to play Miller Moss in the bowl game in place of Caleb Williams. But if it's just a strain, if it's fairly mild, 4 weeks, that probably means Caleb Williams can play. And, Andrew Voorhees will be ready for that game. Now, of course, Brett Nealon, the center, he's out. He's done. Like, he was carted off. You're not going to play him in the bowl game. You're not going to risk his long-term health, for the Cotton Bowl. His USC career is over. Very sad that he won't get a chance to play in a big-time bowl game. But Voorhees should be healthy. And so, you bring back Voorhees on the offensive line, and then you're preparing for either Tulane or UCF. That would be the Cotton Bowl opponent. So I think, if assuming that Caleb Williams' hamstring issue is mild, let's remember, you're bringing him back for 2023. So, you want him to end the 2022 season on a high note, if at all possible, and create that momentum and create some learning experiences going into the following season. And beyond that, like, you want to win the Cotton Bowl. A New Year's Six bowl game, you want to win that. You also want to win a 12th game, and you also want to keep this Lincoln Riley streak alive. Like, this is the significance of the bowl game for USC. If USC wins its bowl game, Lincoln Riley in 6 seasons as a head coach will still not have lost more than 2 games in any of those 6 seasons, 2017 through 2022. So, like, there's still a lot to play for. It's not a playoff semifinal, but there's still a lot to play for, especially if it's the Cotton Bowl on January 2nd. So I think you do try to play Caleb Williams if you reasonably can. And it just depends on the severity of the hamstring injury. If it's a tear, he obviously has to sit. But if it's just a pull or a mild strain, then you give it a run. And, if he's not fully mobile, like, you should still think that if Andrew Voorhees is there on the offensive line, and you have Jordan Addison going up against a Tulane or UCF secondary, that you can have Caleb Williams' mobility being limited in the pocket, and he can still pick and choose wide receivers to throw to. That should still be pretty advantageous. But if it's a torn hamstring, then you sit him. Like that, I think that just the decision will be made based on the medical report, what his actual condition is. I think that the decision's going to be relatively clear for Lincoln Riley to make.
The point I'll make about the bowl matchup would be that during this college football playoff format, and then even prior to that, the group of 5, the best group of 5 team that is typically in the New Year's Six, not advancing to the playoffs like Cincinnati did, of course, that one time last year, typically shows up and plays well. Just run through it historically, folks. Houston, UCF, etc. We can go through all the matchups, but the group of 5 team has generally shown up and played well or won the game its fair share of times. However, there is going to be a perception that USC's in a no-win situation, because if they beat UCF or Tulane, that's exactly what they should do. If they lose that game, that's a bit of an embarrassing loss.
No question. And I think that might play into all of this, is that, like, you don't want to have a loss to UCF or Tulane hanging over your head going into the off season, and getting plenty of comments saying, like, you definitely don't play Caleb Williams in the bowl game. Again, you have 4 weeks. And if this is a mild injury, again, if the injury is mild, like, I'm not I'm not playing doctor here. I'm not saying like this is a mild injury. I'm saying if it's a mild injury, if it's ruled to be reasonably severe, such that there's a real question about whether 4 weeks is enough for him to recover, okay, then you sit him. But if it's pretty clear that he can be better in 4 weeks, such that there's not too much of a question about his ability to play and function, then you play him, because you do want to win this bowl game. You don't want to have a loss hanging over your head going into spring ball. So again, it depends on the medical situation, on the evaluation. I mean, Riley said he popped a hamstring. Now, that could mean like he pulled it. Does that mean a torn hamstring? I don't think that's necessarily the same thing. I'm not making the medical evaluation, though. I'm just saying if it's mild or if it's severe, again, that will resolve itself. And I think that will make the decision for Lincoln Riley and also Caleb Williams.
I want to remind everyone, as you've seen on the ticker throughout the entire show, that Matt and I get together every Monday night at 8 Pacific time. So please join us then for USC Trojans Live. So we'll be back at it in 2 days. And of course, get to Trojans Wire to check out Matt's work. And Matt, we appreciate you being here and doing this special edition as we take everybody through Conference Championship weekend and Conference Championship Saturday here. So I'll just highlight a few things here. I'm going to go live at the halftime of the TCU Kansas State game over on the main channel. And then depending on how things play out through the day, I may cut in at different times or produce various content and analysis, but I will definitely be on after it's all wrapped up. Big Ten championship game, ACC championship game at night. So we'll be on about 11:30 Eastern time live to do the call-in show on the main channel. And then we will be with you live during the watch party for the college football playoff rankings and the playoff selections, which is noon Eastern time on Sunday. All right, Matt. Again, everybody, Trojans Wire, get on over there. Is there anything in particular you'd like to highlight there, Matt?
Well, I mean, just full post-game coverage and, a lot of Alex Grinch discussion. This is part of our USC report card that we do after just about every Trojan game. And then there's a separate standalone piece on Alex Grinch, because really that is the biggest, most urgent conversation surrounding USC football and Lincoln Riley right now. So you want to get a detailed, layered conversation about Alex Grinch, going into the various nuances. You want to read that at Trojans Wire. And then, of course, bowl game coverage, bowl game preview after the bowl selection is announced on Sunday. You're going to get that. And then all next week, Caleb Williams Heisman Trophy coverage. We're going to look back at USC's previous 7 Heisman winners. So it's basically going to be Heisman week at our site, as it should be. And then, of course, covering the portal, which is, it opens on December 5th. That's Monday. And so Lincoln Riley hoping to feast at the banquet table. Once again, we're going to be on top of the portal, looking at, what happens for USC there. So it's going to be, it's not going to be a college football playoff month at Trojans Wire, unfortunately, but still a ton of news going through December into early January. So you want to follow Trojans Wire for the bowl game, for the transfer portal, and for Caleb Williams Heisman Trophy, which he's still almost certain to win in a week at the Downtown Athletic Club.
Matt, we appreciate it as always. And again, everyone, I'll be live to take your calls for about 15 minutes during halftime of the TCU Kansas State game on the main channel. All right, Matt, thank you so much for doing this, and we will see you on Monday night.
You bet. Thanks, Mark.